Daniel Cole stood on his own front porch, holding a set of keys that no longer opened his own front door. His suitcase was already outside. Someone had packed it for him badly, in a hurry, like they wanted him gone before he could even ask why. Through the frosted glass he could see two shapes, his wife, Vanessa, and behind her, arms crossed, chin lifted like a queen passing judgment, his mother-in-law Carol. "You'll never be enough for her," Carol said, her voice muffled but sharp enough to cut through the door. "You never were." Vanessa said nothing. She just turned the deadbolt. Daniel didn't shout, he didn't beg, he didn't even knock again. He stood there for exactly 10 seconds, looking at the house he had paid for in cash, under a name neither of them had ever bothered to look up. Then he picked up his phone, scrolled to a contact saved simply as Monsieur Rourke Legal, and pressed call. "It's time," he said quietly. "Move forward with everything we discussed." Neither woman behind that door had any idea what they had just done. They thought they were throwing out a warehouse supervisor who made $41,000 a year. They had no idea they had just humiliated a man worth more money than either of them could imagine, and that somewhere in that house a phone had been recording the entire thing. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to Amazing Folktale, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Hype up the video. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what your local time is in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories connect people from all around the world. Let's get started. To understand what Carol and Vanessa did that night, you have to understand who Daniel Cole really was, or rather, who he had chosen to become. For 9 years, Daniel drove the same truck, a dented, faded blue pickup with over 200,000 miles on it, and a check engine light that never fully went off. He clipped coupons every Sunday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, cutting little squares out of the newspaper like it actually mattered whether cereal was 50 cents cheaper. It wasn't necessity, it was a rule he had made for himself a long time ago. "If people only love the version of you that has nothing," he once told a friend, "then at least you'll know the ones who stay are staying for you." At the warehouse where he worked as a shift supervisor, Daniel was the guy who remembered everyone's kids' names. The guy who covered shifts when a coworker's car broke down. The guy who never raised his voice, even when a forklift operator dented a rack that cost the company $4,000 to replace. "Things can be fixed," Daniel would say. "People can't always be." Nobody at that warehouse knew that 9 years earlier, Daniel had walked away from a life of private schools, country clubs, and a father who measured love in stock options. He had walked away from a fiancée named Renata, to a woman he had loved with his whole young heart, until the night he overheard her on the phone with her sister. "I'm not marrying him for fun, Ashley. Have you seen his family's portfolio?" That sentence broke something in Daniel that never fully healed. Not his ability to love, but his ability to trust that love could exist without an audit attached to it. So he left. He changed almost everything about how he lived. He built something new quietly, secretly, painstakingly under a legal name almost no one connected to the man driving the blue pickup truck. He funneled his growing wealth through a blind trust managed by one lawyer he trusted completely, Marcus Rourke. And every single payday, after cashing his modest warehouse check, Daniel would drive to a small credit union across town and deposit a portion of it into an account Vanessa didn't know existed. Not to hide money from her out of cruelty, but because he was saving, quietly, patiently, for the day he could finally sit her down and tell her everything. "I'm going to tell her when the time is right," he used to whisper to himself in that truck. "When I know, for certain, that she loves the man, not the money that might come with him." He believed Vanessa was different from Renata. He believed it with his whole chest. He was wrong about one thing, though not about Vanessa, about her mother. If you want to understand the real emotional center of this story, you have to look past Vanessa, and even past Daniel. You have to look at Mia. Mia was Vanessa's younger sister, 24 years old, soft-spoken, exhausted in that particular way that only nursing students understand. The kind of exhaustion that comes from 12-hour hospital shifts, followed by studying until 2 a.m. Mia had grown up in Carol's shadow her entire life, and not the good kind of shadow, the kind that never let sunlight through. Vanessa got the looks, Carol used to say at family dinners, laughing like it was a joke. Mia got the grades. I guess somebody has to be the smart, disappointing one. Mia used to force a smile when Carol said things like that. She learned early that crying only made it worse. Carol enjoyed tears the way some people enjoy applause. While Vanessa got a car for her 16th birthday, Mia got a second-hand bicycle to build character. While Vanessa's college tuition was paid without question, Mia was told to figure it out and took out loans she was still paying off at 24. But Mia had one thing Carol never suspected she had: a memory for detail and a habit of turning on her phone's voice recorder whenever family gatherings started to feel like they were about to go somewhere ugly. She didn't do it out of malice. She did it because for years after Carol would say something cruel and then later deny ever saying it, twisting the memory until Mia doubted her own mind. Mia needed proof. Not to expose anyone, just to remind herself, quietly, in the dark of her dorm room. I'm not crazy. This actually happened. She had almost 4 years of recordings sitting untouched in a folder on her phone, labeled simply, Notes. Mia adored Daniel. He was the only person in that family who ever asked her how her nursing exams went and actually remembered the answer 3 weeks later. He was the one who once drove 90 minutes at midnight to bring her soup when she had the flu, and no one else in the family would leave their warm house to check on her. You're the only real one in this family, Mia told him once, half joking, half not. Daniel had laughed it off. But Mia meant it. And that quiet loyalty, the kind nobody was paying attention to, would end up being the thread that unraveled everything. Carol didn't start as a monster. She started as a woman who was, by her own private admission, terrified of being poor again. She had grown up with very little, married a man who left her with even less, and clawed her way into a comfortable, image-conscious life through sheer force of will. She wasn't evil in the cartoonish sense. She was something more common and more dangerous. She was a woman who genuinely believed that love and financial security were the same thing, and that anyone who told her otherwise was either lying or naive. At first, her disrespect toward Daniel was small, almost forgettable. "Oh, Daniel's still at the warehouse," she'd say to relatives at holidays, in a tone that made warehouse sound like a diagnosis. "Bless him. Not everyone is ambitious, I suppose." Small comments, small sighs. The kind of thing you could almost convince yourself you imagined. Then came the lie. It started casually, over coffee, just Carol and Vanessa. "I heard Daniel was at Finnegan's last week," Carol said, stirring her coffee slowly, not making eye contact. "With a woman from his work. Sherry, I think her name was." It wasn't true. Daniel hadn't been to Finnegan's in over a year. But Carol had heard through a neighbor that someone who looked like Daniel had been seen there, and rather than mention it casually and let it go, she planted it like a seed, watching carefully to see if it would grow roots in her daughter's mind. "I'm sure it's nothing," Carol added quickly, which was, of course, exactly the kind of thing you say when you want someone to believe it's definitely something. There was one more detail buried in Carol's conversations that nobody paid attention to, yet a name she kept bringing up a little too often. "Preston's doing so well now, you know," Carol mentioned one evening, refilling her wine glass. "Regional director at his company. Drives a very nice car. I ran into his mother at the salon." Preston. Vanessa's college boyfriend. The one who broke her heart before Daniel ever came along. Vanessa waved it off each time. "Mom, I'm married!" But Carol just smiled the way she always smiled when she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The first real fracture happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Vanessa was going through Daniel's jacket pocket, looking for a parking ticket she thought she'd left in there, when her fingers closed around a hotel receipt instead. The Ashford Grand, downtown, $240. A date from the previous week, a night Daniel had told her he was working late. Her stomach dropped. "What is this?" she asked, holding it up when he walked in the door. Daniel glanced at it. His face didn't change much, which, in hindsight, was the worst possible reaction he could have had. "It's not what it looks like," he said. "Then tell me what it does look like." He hesitated. The truth was simple. Actually, he had met with his legal team in a private conference room at the Ashford to finalize paperwork for a subsidiary acquisition. Paperwork that required absolute confidentiality until the blind trust restructuring was complete. He couldn't explain any of that without unraveling 9 years of careful secrecy in one sentence, in his kitchen, on a random Tuesday. So he said the only thing he could say without lying and without revealing everything. I can't explain it right now. But I promise you, it's not what you think. To anyone who didn't know Daniel's history, that answer would sound suspicious. To Vanessa, raised in a household where every ambiguous silence had eventually turned out to hide something ugly, it sounded like a confession. You can't explain it, she repeated slowly. Or you won't. Vanessa. Just tell me the truth, Daniel. He looked at her for a long moment. 9 years of self-protection built from the wreckage of Renata's betrayal rose up in him like a wall he didn't even choose to build anymore. It just appeared automatically every time someone asked him to explain himself. I need you to trust me, he said instead. Just a little longer. It was the wrong answer. Not because it was a lie, it wasn't, but because trust, when it's one-sided and unexplained, starts to feel exactly like betrayal. Vanessa didn't sleep that night, and the next morning she made the mistake of telling her mother everything. Carol listened with the calm, patient face of a woman who had been waiting 9 years for exactly this kind of opening. A man who won't explain himself, Carol said softly, pouring tea like she was delivering scripture, is always hiding something worse than what you're imagining. And just like that, a single unexplained hotel receipt became the crack that Carol would spend the next several months prying wide open. The audience and Vanessa are left with one aching question. What is Daniel really hiding? By the time the family gathered for Vanessa's cousin's engagement dinner in early summer, the crack had become a fracture. Carol had spent weeks whispering never anything overt, always just enough, a comment here, a raised eyebrow there. I just worry about you, delivered so many times it had become its own kind of accusation. At the dinner, seated at a long table under string lights, Carol found her moment. So, Daniel, she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, smiling sweetly. Still at the warehouse? I always forget your exact title. What is it again, forklift supervisor? A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. Shift supervisor, Daniel said evenly. Right, of course. The warehouse boy. Carol laughed, sipping her wine, glancing sideways to see who else found it funny. Across the table, a man in an expensive gray blazer smiled into his glass. Preston. Newly invited back into the family's orbit under the flimsy pretense of, the kids all grew up together, it would be nice to reconnect. Daniel said nothing. He simply reached for the bread basket and passed it to his left. The way he always did, quiet, steady, refusing to give Carol the reaction she was fishing for. But the humiliation didn't stay at the dinner table. 2 weeks later, Carol pulled Vanessa aside with a folder of papers. I talked to a lawyer friend, Carol said, for your protection. If anything ever happens, heaven forbid you should have the house solely in your name, just to be safe. Mom, we're not getting divorced. I didn't say you were. I said safe, sweetheart. A smart woman protects herself. Vanessa, exhausted and unmoored from months of quiet suspicion, signed the paperwork without telling Daniel. What neither woman realized was that Daniel had structured his own assets years earlier, separate accounts, a trust, protections that had nothing to do with Vanessa, and everything to do with the scars Renata had left behind. Carol's little trap didn't touch a cent of what actually mattered. She was rearranging furniture in a house she didn't know was empty. Meanwhile, Mia tried to intervene. Vanessa, please listen to me, she said one night, catching her sister alone in the kitchen. Mom isn't protecting you. She's controlling you. She does this. She did it to me for years. Vanessa's eyes were red-rimmed and tired. You don't understand what it's like to be married, Mia. You don't understand what it's like when your husband won't even look you in the eye and explain a hotel receipt. And you don't understand what it's like to grow up watching Mom decide who deserves love in this family, Mia shot back, quieter now. I'm telling you she has a plan. She always has a plan. Vanessa didn't want to hear it. She walked away. The audience is left furious. watching a good man be humiliated in public and a good sister be dismissed for telling the truth while the real motive behind all of it still hasn't been named. The blurry photo arrived on a Thursday. Carol slid her phone across the kitchen table, the image already pulled up. It showed Daniel, in a suit Vanessa had never seen him wear, walking into a glass office tower downtown, the kind of building with a marble lobby and a doorman. "A friend of mine works nearby," Carol said. "She sent me this. Said she's seen him there more than once. With a woman apparently, though she couldn't get a clear shot of her." Vanessa stared at the photo. Daniel, in a suit, walking into a building that looked like it belonged to a different life entirely. That's not him," Vanessa said, though her voice wavered. "He doesn't even own a suit like that." "Are you sure?" Carol asked gently, the cruelest kind of gentle. "Because that certainly looks like him to me." It was him. That building was the headquarters of the very company Daniel had spent 9 years secretly building. But neither Vanessa nor Carol had any way of knowing that. All they saw was evidence of a double life, and Carol, whether she fully realized it or not, was closer to the truth than she understood, for reasons that had nothing to do with morality. Because at that same time, in an office 3 floors above the one in that blurry photo, Preston was sitting across from his new employer's board, presenting a plan. "The target company has kept its ownership unusually private," Preston told the room, tapping a laser pointer against a projection screen. "But we believe if we can create enough personal instability for the anonymous majority owner, we can pressure a faster, cheaper acquisition. Divide and conquer, so to speak." He didn't say Daniel's name. He didn't need to. He didn't even fully know it yet. But Preston had been quietly feeding Carol information for weeks, small details, about a man connected to that building downtown, hoping that whatever chaos Carol created in her daughter's marriage might rattle loose a business advantage he didn't yet understand he already had access to. Carol thought she was protecting her daughter from an unfaithful husband. Preston thought he was softening up a corporate target. Neither of them realized they were talking about the exact same man. That same week, Mia was helping Daniel move a few boxes out of his truck, when a folder slipped out, spilling papers across the driveway. She knelt to help gather them, and froze. At the top of one page, in small formal print, was a company name she didn't recognize, and beneath it, a name that wasn't Daniel Cole. Daniel," she said slowly, holding the paper up. "Who's Nathaniel Osei Cole?" Daniel took the folder from her hands gently, his face unreadable. "Someone I used to be," he said. "Please don't mention this to anyone yet. I promise I'll explain everything soon." Mia looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, tucking the question away the same way she'd tucked away 4 years of recordings. Waiting for the right moment. The viewer at this point knows something enormous is coming. The story has planted the pieces. Now it's time for them to fall. The night it all came apart started ordinarily enough. Vanessa, worn down by months of doubt, planted evidence, and Carol's relentless whispering finally reached her breaking point over something small. Daniel coming home 20 minutes late without answering his phone, because he'd been in a call with Marcus Rourke about the accelerating threat from Preston's company. "I'm done," Vanessa said, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wet. "I'm done not knowing who my own husband is. I'm done with hotel receipts and secret buildings and you refusing to just talk to me. Vanessa, please. Get out." Carol appeared behind her a moment later, as if she'd been standing just out of view the whole time, waiting for her cue. She said, "Get out, Daniel. I think it's best for everyone." This was the moment from the very beginning of the story: the suitcase on the lawn, the locked door, the 2 women standing together in righteous certainty. Daniel didn't argue. He gathered what he could from what had already been packed, and walked to his truck in silence. But as he reached the end of the driveway, Mia came running out barefoot onto the cold concrete. "Daniel, wait!" He turned. Mia stood there for a moment, searching his face like she was trying to solve something. "You could destroy them," she said quietly. Whatever this is, whoever you really are, you could destroy this whole family right now if you wanted to, and you're not even trying to. Why? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Because hurting them wouldn't make any of this hurt less, he finally said. I just wanted someone to love the man in the truck, Mia, not the name in the folder. He got in his truck and drove away. Mia stood in the driveway long after his taillights disappeared, holding a single enormous realization in her chest. Her brother-in-law wasn't hiding an affair. He was hiding an empire in the weeks that followed. Carol didn't slow down, she accelerated. With Daniel gone, she began actively steering Vanessa back toward Preston, framing it as concern rather than agenda. You deserve stability, Carol said over lunch one afternoon, watching Vanessa pick at her salad. Preston reached out, asked how you were doing. He's matured so much, successful now, stable. Wouldn't it be nice to just feel safe again? What Carol never said out loud, what she may not have even admitted fully to herself, was that Preston's success and his company's ambitions had quietly become tangled up with her own sense of vindication. If her daughter ended up with a real successful man, it would prove once and for all that Carol had been right to fight against Daniel from the beginning. Rumors spread through the extended family like smoke. Daniel just up and left. Guess he couldn't handle a real relationship. Probably ashamed of himself. Nobody defended him because nobody had heard his side, and Daniel, true to the pattern that had both protected and isolated him for 9 years, said nothing to correct any of it. His silence once again was mistaken for guilt. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Rourke called Daniel with news that changed the shape of everything. It's not just corporate pressure anymore, Marcus said. Preston's company filed a formal hostile acquisition attempt this morning. They're moving fast, Daniel. And I think based on some of what you've told me about Carol's behavior, I think this isn't a coincidence. I think they've been using your personal life as leverage without even fully realizing whose life they were disrupting. Daniel sat in his small rented apartment, staring at the wall, piecing it together. The photo of him entering his own headquarters, Preston's sudden reappearance in the family, Carol's manipulation escalating at the exact same pace as the acquisition attempt. It wasn't 2 separate stories anymore. It was one conspiracy, tangled from 2 completely different directions: a mother trying to control her daughter's love life, and a jilted ex trying to control a company he didn't yet know he was already circling. The viewer's question sharpens into something almost unbearable. How long until someone finally puts it together? It was Mia who moved first. A week after Daniel left, she volunteered to help Vanessa clean out an old drawer in what used to be Daniel's home office, ostensibly to make space. Though really, Mia had been waiting for an excuse to look for answers. Buried beneath old bank statements and warehouse pay stubs, she found a single unmarked envelope. Inside were legal documents, trust paperwork, bearing the name Mia had already glimpsed once before: Nathaniel Osei Cole. She didn't say anything to Vanessa yet. Instead, she sat in her car in the driveway, and finally opened the folder on her phone labeled Notes. 4 years of recordings she had never played for anyone. She scrolled until she found one from 8 months ago, recorded almost by accident during a family gathering. Carol's voice caught mid-conversation with an aunt in the kitchen. Honestly, if I can just get Vanessa to doubt him enough, she'll come around to Preston eventually. It's better for her. And frankly, it wouldn't hurt any of us if she ended up with someone who actually has real prospects. Mia's hands were shaking by the time the recording ended. That evening, she sat Vanessa down at the kitchen table, phone between them. I need you to listen to something, Mia said. All the way through, please. She played it. Then she played 3 more months of Carol's voice casually admitting, in fragments across years, exactly what she'd been doing. Planting doubt, steering Vanessa toward Preston, referring to Daniel more than once with contempt Vanessa had never fully heard out loud before. Vanessa sat frozen, her tea going cold in front of her, listening to her own mother's voice laying out a plan she'd never been told she was a part of. Mom said, she said this was about protecting me, Vanessa whispered. No, Mia said softly. It was about controlling you. There's a difference, Van. There's always been a difference. For the first time in months, doubt cracked open in the wrong direction, not toward Daniel, but toward everything Vanessa thought she knew. That night, unable to sleep, Vanessa sat alone with her laptop and typed the name from the folder into a search bar with trembling fingers. Nathaniel Osei Cole. The first result was a Business Journal article, 18 months old, titled, "The Quiet Founder: How One of FreightTech's Most Private Owners Built an $80 million Company Without Anyone Noticing." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. The article described a reclusive entrepreneur who had built a logistics and freight technology company from nothing, operating almost entirely behind a blind trust, refusing interviews, refusing publicity, living according to the one source willing to speak anonymously, an almost aggressively ordinary life outside of work. There was a photo, grainy, clearly taken without his knowledge, at some industry event he must have been required to attend. It was Daniel. Not looks like him. Not resembles him. It was him younger, in a suit, but unmistakably her husband. And the company named in the article, the one currently facing an aggressive and unusual acquisition attempt from a mid-sized logistics firm, was the exact same company Preston had been bragging about working for at every family dinner for the past 2 months. Vanessa read the article 4 times before she could fully process it. Her husband, the warehouse supervisor, the coupon clipper, the man who drove a truck held together with duct tape and stubbornness, was the anonymous owner of a company worth more money than she could comprehend. And her mother had spent months trying to destroy their marriage on behalf of the exact company trying to steal it out from under him. She drove to Daniel's apartment before sunrise, printout in hand, and knocked until he opened the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, blinking at her in the dark. "Vanessa? What's?" She held up the article, hands shaking. "Is this true?" Daniel looked at the page. He didn't reach for it. He didn't deny it. He just exhaled, slowly, like a man setting down something impossibly heavy. "Yes," he said. "It's true." "Why?" Vanessa whispered, her voice breaking. "Would you let me think you were struggling? Why would you let my mother humiliate you at every dinner? Why would you let me think?" "Because I needed to know," Daniel said quietly, "if you'd have chosen me without it. And Vanessa," he paused, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I have my answer now, and it isn't the one I wanted." 3 weeks later, Carol organized what she called a fresh start dinner, a gathering meant to formally, gently reintroduce Preston into the family as Vanessa's future, dressed up as an innocent reunion of old friends. She had no idea that the acquisition meeting Preston had scheduled that same afternoon, the final, decisive negotiation session with the anonymous majority owner of the company his firm was trying to acquire, was taking place in the exact same downtown building where the dinner's private room had been booked, just 4 floors up. Daniel walked into that dinner not for revenge but because the timing had simply, inevitably, collided. He wore the suit from the blurry photograph. The room went silent. "Daniel," Carol said, her voice faltering for the first time anyone at that table had ever heard. What are you doing here?" "I had a meeting upstairs," Daniel said calmly. "Preston's company was trying to acquire mine. I imagine he can explain the rest." Preston's face drained of color as the pieces assembled themselves in real time in front of everyone. You're O.C. Cole," Preston said, barely audible. "You're the owner. The whole time, you were—" "The warehouse boy," Daniel finished for him, quiet and even. No cruelty in his voice at all, which somehow made it land harder than anger ever could. "Yes, the whole time." Carol's mouth opened and closed, searching for a version of the last several months that didn't make her look exactly like what she was. "I was trying to protect my daughter," she finally managed. "No," Daniel said. "You were trying to control her, and you nearly destroyed her marriage helping a man secure a business deal against me, without even realizing that's what you were doing. You didn't do this out of love, Carol. You did it out of fear disguised as certainty, and I hope someday you can tell the difference." He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. Vanessa sat frozen at the table, watching her mother for the first time in her adult life have absolutely nothing left to say. Justice, when it finally arrived, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The acquisition attempt collapsed within the month. Daniel's board, informed of the conflict of interest and the underhanded tactics involved, terminated all discussions permanently. Preston, having staked his entire pitch to leadership on a plan that had just imploded publicly and humiliatingly, lost his position within 6 weeks. The last anyone in the family heard, he had moved out of state, taking a much smaller job at a company that had never heard of Daniel Cole, or Nathaniel Osei Cole, or any of it. Carol's punishment was quieter, and in some ways heavier. Daniel never sued her, never exposed her publicly beyond that one dinner, never took a single cent from her, though he certainly could have made her life very difficult if he'd chosen to. Instead, Vanessa did something Carol never expected. She moved out. Not out of Daniel's life, out of her mother's orbit, for the first time in 29 years. She rented a small apartment on her own, paid for with her own salary, and told Carol, gently but firmly, that she needed space to figure out who she was when she wasn't being steered. "You're punishing me," Carol said, tears in her eyes, the first time in the story anyone had ever seen her cry. "No, Mom," Vanessa said. "I'm finally protecting myself. That's all you ever said you were doing for me. I'm just doing it for real." Carol lost the one thing she had spent her whole life trying to secure through manipulation, control. Not through cruelty, not through revenge, but through the simple, devastating consequence of her daughter finally choosing her own mind. Mia, for her part, was the only one who came out of the entire ordeal with something added rather than taken away. Daniel, once everything settled, quietly paid off the remainder of her nursing school loans anonymously at first, until she figured out exactly who her mystery benefactor was. "You didn't have to do that," she told him. "You're the only one who ever asked how my exams went," he said. I remembered. This story doesn't end with Daniel and Vanessa falling back into each other's arms the moment the truth came out. Real trust doesn't work that way, and this story never pretended it did. For months, Vanessa didn't ask Daniel to come home. She didn't perform forgiveness, and she didn't demand his. Instead, she did something harder and slower. She showed up, week after week, not with apologies, but with honesty. She told him, plainly, the ways she had failed to protect their marriage from her mother's influence. She told him she understood, now, why he had built his walls in the first place, even if she still wished he had trusted her sooner. Daniel, in turn, stopped hiding. He told her everything about Renata, about the 9 years of silence, about the account she never knew existed, now no longer a secret but simply theirs, if she wanted it to be. "I don't need the money to mean anything," Vanessa told him one evening, sitting across from him at a small kitchen table in his apartment, not the mansion the tabloids would later speculate about, just a table, 2 mugs of coffee, and an honesty that had never existed between them before. "I just want you, the version of you that clips coupons and remembers Mia's exam schedule. That's the man I fell in love with. I just want to actually know him now." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Then let's start over," he said. "For real this time. No hiding." The story doesn't end in a fairy tale reunion, a mansion, or a grand public reconciliation. It ends in something smaller and somehow more powerful: 2 people, sitting at a plain kitchen table, choosing honesty over comfort for the very first time. Because in the end, the biggest mistake Vanessa and Carol ever made wasn't underestimating how much money Daniel had. It was underestimating how much truth was worth to a man who had spent his whole life searching for someone who would love him without needing to know. If this story moved you, remember this: the people who truly love you will stay when you have nothing to give, and the ones who leave when the truth is inconvenient were never really staying for you at all.
Moral of the story: love that only survives comfort was never really love. It was convenience wearing love's face. Daniel spent 9 years hiding his wealth, not because he didn't trust people, but because he had already been betrayed once by someone who mistook his bank account for his heart. What he learned, painfully and slowly, is that the people who truly love you will stand beside you when you have nothing to offer them. No title, no money, no proof of worth beyond who you are when the lights are off and no one's watching. Carol's downfall wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was fear dressed up as protection, control disguised as care. And that's often how real damage happens, not through obvious villains, but through people so certain they're right that they never stop to ask who they're actually hurting. The lesson here is simple but easy to forget. Never let someone else's fear decide who you're allowed to trust. Ask questions instead of assuming the worst. Give people room to explain before you let doubt make the decision for you. And remember, the truest test of love isn't found in wealth, appearances, or what someone can give you. It's found in who stays when you have nothing left to prove.